My name is Marissa. I'm 32 years old, born and raised in Savannah, Georgia, a place where magnolias bloom longer than most apologies, and where appearances matter more than truth. I've lived with spots on my skin for as long as I can remember. Dense constellations of deep brown moles and birthmarks that bloom across my chest, shoulders, arms, and up my neck. Some people call them beauty marks. That's generous. Most people just stare or look away too quickly, like I'm contagious. My tattoos came later, in my early 20s, not as decoration, but as armor. Inked vines crawling up my arms, a coiled snake on my bicep, and a line of Hebrew on my collarbone that means I exist. They were never about rebellion. They were my way of saying, if the world won't accept what's already written on my body, I'll write the rest myself. I work in branding now. I built a quiet empire from behind closed doors, designing names, identities, legacies for people and companies who don't know I look the way I do. My work has graced champagne bottles, tech startups, and luxury hotels. But my face? Never the campaign. I learned early that clients liked my voice better on the phone, my ideas better in a pitch deck. And I let them. Because it kept the doors open. Because it paid for my own. The last time I saw my younger sister Jenna in person was 8 months ago at a family brunch. She had just gotten engaged, the ring still new enough to warrant a dozen hand gestures meant only to flash it. I brought a gift, custom stationery I designed for her future initials, which she opened with a tight smile and set aside without a word. I remember my stepfather saying something like, "How thoughtful," and Jenna replying, "I probably won't use them." I left early. I always left early. When she called last week, I almost didn't answer. The number blinked at me while I was mid-draft on a campaign for a skincare brand that markets real beauty, using models with perfectly placed freckles and digitally softened pores. I let it ring twice before answering. She didn't waste time. "No catching up, no how have you been, just, the engagement party's going to be small. Aesthetic," she said. "Intimate, curated." And my look, her words, might not match the visual tone. I didn't understand at first. I asked if she meant my outfit. She sighed, like I was being difficult on purpose. "It's just the photos," she said. "There will be a lot of photographers, a lot of her fiancé's family, and she wanted everything to feel clean." Clean. The word echoed. It hit harder than it should have, probably because it wasn't new. I'd heard variations of it all my life. Teachers who asked if I'd been to a dermatologist. Co-workers who flinched when our arms brushed. Strangers at gas stations who offered unsolicited advice about natural treatments or tattoo removal. Clean was a word people used when they meant unmarked, when they meant normal, when they meant not like me. I didn't cry. Not in front of her. I said I understood. That I was busy anyway. That I hoped it would be beautiful. We hung up, and I sat on my kitchen floor for what felt like hours. My hands pressed against the tile like I was trying to ground myself. But the ground didn't want me either. I kept thinking about how we used to share a room. How I once helped her cover up a hickey before prom. How she used to braid my hair and tell me I looked like a superhero. Now I was something that didn't fit her vision board. The next morning, I received an invitation, not to the party, to contribute a quote about Jenna and her fiancé for their wedding website. A blurb, a branding moment, something clever and personal. The irony almost made me laugh. She didn't want me in the pictures, but she still wanted my voice. Just my voice. I didn't write anything. I deleted the email. Then I opened a folder on my desktop labeled Pending, Blake Hartman. Blake, her fiancé. The man I had never really met, but whose name I'd seen dozens of times on memos, on internal documents, on the acquisition proposal sitting in front of me. His marketing agency was the target of a quiet buyout I'd been orchestrating for over 3 months. The universe doesn't hand you revenge, but sometimes it lets you sit at the table with a pen. That night, I took off my shirt and stood in front of the mirror. I studied the constellation of brown and black across my chest, the winding snake inked in black across my left arm, the delicate branches on the right. I looked at myself the way she never had. Not with critique, not with forced politeness. Just quiet acceptance. This is my face, my skin, my shape, the history my body carries, written in flesh and ink and scars that no one else gets to edit. They didn't want me at the party, but they had no idea I was already inside the building. 2 days after that call with Jenna, I received a voicemail. The number was unfamiliar, but the voice wasn't. It was calm, corporate, and measured in the way only men who've never been embarrassed in a room full of people can sound. He introduced himself, Blake Hartman, Jenna's fiancé, and thanked me for understanding the guest list situation. I replayed the message 3 times, trying to decipher the condescension behind his perfectly spaced syllables. He didn't sound uncomfortable. He sounded rehearsed, like he was checking off a box labeled damage control. I hadn't even responded to Jenna's invitation denial, yet here he was, preemptively smoothing over any possible ripple I might cause. Not because he was worried about my feelings, but because I could disrupt their narrative. He said they hoped I wouldn't take it personally, that it was about comfort. Not mine, of course, but the guests. Some might feel uneasy, he said, around visually complex appearances. He actually said that. Visually complex. As if I were a puzzle, a challenge, a problem someone might need help understanding. I sat there with my phone against my knee, listening to the silence after his message ended. Then I pressed play again. I imagined him sitting at his desk in his sleek, minimalist office, with filtered lighting, and a framed quote on the wall about disruption or vision or innovation. I imagined him adjusting his cufflinks while telling his assistant to just handle it. And somewhere in that mental picture, I saw Jenna sitting beside him, nodding, approving, letting this man speak for both of them. Speak to me, like I was an inconvenience they had to handle delicately. I didn't delete the message. I saved it. Not because I wanted to hear it again, but because I wanted proof that I hadn't invented it in my head. That someone really thought my existence was disruptive enough to warrant a preemptive apology. That night, I went for a walk. Savannah's streets have a way of holding heat long after the sun goes down. The bricks beneath my feet radiated warmth, but I felt cold. I passed the same church where Jenna once played piano recitals, the bakery where we used to sneak croissants on Sunday mornings, the park bench where she cried to me about her first breakup. And I realized something terrifying. I had become the ghost in my own hometown. Not mourned, not remembered, just faded out of frame. When I got home, I stood in the bathroom and traced one of my tattoos with my finger, the snake. I remembered the sting of the needle, the heat of it, the way it wrapped around my arm like a protective vine. People always assumed I got tattoos to attract attention. The truth is, I got them to reclaim it. To draw the eye where I wanted it to go, not where the world told it should land. But no ink could shield me from the ache of erasure. I started noticing it everywhere. The soft corrections people made mid-sentence. The way my mother flinched when I wore sleeveless dresses to dinner. The way strangers on flights asked if I had a skin condition before asking my name. The compliments that came with caveats. You're brave to wear that. That's bold. I could never pull that off. Like existing in my skin was performance art, not survival. And now, Blake had said it out loud. The thing so many others only implied. That I was too much. Too visual. Too distracting for the delicate balance of a curated celebration. That my skin might spoil someone's Instagram post. that my presence could make a champagne toast feel awkward. That my body, which had carried me through abuse, loss, therapy, healing, and triumph, was unfit to be background. That's when something inside me began to split. Not shatter, not break, but separate. A clean division between who I had been trying to be for my family and who I was when they weren't looking. The version of me they tolerated, polite, soft-spoken, agreeable, had never truly been accepted. Not at church, not at family dinners, not at birthdays, not even in the background of a party that wasn't about me. I had spent years minimizing my presence just to be allowed in the room, only to find out I was never really welcome in the first place. I started digging. The next morning, I opened my laptop and logged into the client portal I rarely needed. I searched Blake's agency by its legal name and reviewed the latest acquisition drafts. There it was, a nearly finalized partnership. My company was about to absorb his. And once the ink dried, he would report directly to me. I stared at the file for a long time. I thought about moving the timeline up. I thought about walking into his office the next day and watching the recognition flicker across his face. But I didn't. Not yet. Because revenge, if that's what this was, meant nothing if it came too fast. What I wanted wasn't vindication. I wanted understanding. I wanted that voicemail to echo in his own head the way it echoed in mine. The next day, Jenna posted a photo from her bridal fitting. Lace, pale pinks, a glowing caption, dozens of comments. I wasn't tagged. I wasn't even mentioned. Just like that, I was erased in real time. I looked at her smile and thought, she really believes she's doing the right thing, that keeping me out is kinder than letting me in and watching others squirm. That's the part that stung. Not that I was excluded, but that they believed their cruelty was compassion. I didn't plan to go home. Not at first. But something in me needed to see it again. To walk through the same front door and know for sure that what I felt was real. I packed a small duffel bag with just enough for one night and drove out to buy the house I used to believe was mine, though now I wonder if it ever really was. The streets looked smaller than I remembered, like the neighborhood had shrunk in my absence. The trees that used to tower over our yard were thinner, more brittle, as if they too had grown tired of pretending everything inside that house was still alive. When I pulled into the driveway, I could see her through the kitchen window. My mother. She was stirring something on the stove, wearing one of her pastel sweaters and those pearl earrings she only put on when company was coming. For a second, I considered turning around, leaving before the silence could settle in. But I didn't. I got out, walked to the door, and rang the bell, even though I still remembered the code. She opened the door and her face didn't change. Not in surprise, not in welcome, not in disapproval. Just nothing. Like a mirror wiped clean. I said her name, not Mom, just her name because it felt safer. She stepped aside without a word and let me in. Inside, everything was as it had always been, and yet completely unrecognizable. The furniture was in the same place. The rug I spilled grape juice on when I was 6 was still under the coffee table. But the air had changed. It felt thinner, polished, like a showroom. My sister's engagement photos were already framed on the mantel. 4 of them. All soft light and white dresses and perfect skin. None of me. Not even the old photos from when we were kids. I wondered when she had taken them down. If she had done it casually, during spring cleaning, or if she had needed a reason. I set my bag down near the base of the stairs and stood in the living room for a long time, unsure of what I was even doing there. My mother returned to the kitchen without asking why I'd come. She didn't ask if I was hungry. She didn't ask anything. The only sound was the clicking of her spoon against the pot and the dull hum of the ceiling fan. I walked through the hallway toward the stairs, expecting the usual framed pictures along the wall. But they were gone too. Replaced with abstract art landscapes. Nothing personal. Nothing that had roots in this family. When I reached my old room, I hesitated. The door was open, the light off. I pushed it slowly, half afraid of what I'd see. The bed was stripped, mattress bare. Boxes were stacked in the corner, labeled with Jenna's name. Wedding supplies, storage. One box read, guest room linens. My name wasn't on any of them. I stepped inside and sat on the edge of the mattress. The springs creaked under my weight, and dust puffed up from the fabric like it had been waiting to breathe again. I looked at the wall where my bookshelf used to be, the place where I had scribbled a quote in Sharpie under the windowsill when I was 16. Something dramatic about freedom and fire. Painted over. No trace. That was when it hit me. I hadn't come here to be consoled. I had come to confirm a suspicion that this place, this house that held my childhood and my pain and my first victories, had let go of me long before I had let go of it. I went back downstairs, my footsteps slow, heavy. My mother was setting 2 bowls on the table. She didn't look up when I entered the kitchen. I wanted to believe this was her version of a peace offering, but it felt hollow, mechanical, like she was going through the motions because she didn't know what else to do with me. We ate in silence, the clinking of silverware between us louder than words. She never asked why I was there. I never explained. I waited for her to say something, anything, to ask if I was okay, to say she was sorry. But she didn't. She chewed, swallowed, reached for her napkin, and dabbed the corners of her mouth like I was a guest she wasn't quite sure how to entertain. When the plates were cleared, she started talking about Jenna's dress, about how beautiful the fabric was, how well it fit, how the boutique had called it timeless. Her voice softened when she spoke about her. Her eyes lit up in a way I hadn't seen in years. I listened. I nodded. I said nothing. Later, in the guest room, because it was no longer my room, I lay on top of the made bed and stared at the ceiling. I could hear her footsteps above me, muffled and slow. At some point, she turned off the lights, and the house fell quiet. I didn't sleep. I watched the patterns of shadows on the ceiling and tried to remember the last time I felt wanted under this roof. In the morning, I packed without making a sound. She was already in the kitchen, sipping coffee. She didn't ask if I was leaving. She didn't say goodbye. She just stood there, looking out the window, fingers wrapped tightly around the mug like it was the only thing anchoring her. I stood in the doorway for a few seconds longer than I needed to, hoping she might turn around, hoping she might say something to make me stay. But the silence was a wall, and I had already learned how to stop banging my fists against it. As I drove away, the sun started to rise behind me. The house shrank in the rearview mirror until it was just another shape on a street that didn't know my name. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I just drove. Because I understood now. There are places you can return to physically, but spiritually. Emotionally, you've already been written out. That house may still be standing, but it is no longer my home. The Monday after I left my mother's house, I arrived at the office just after sunrise. The building was still quiet, the kind of stillness that only exists in places built for performance. The glass doors sighed open as I walked through them, the lobby bathed in sterile light. My heels echoed on the tile floor. The receptionist looked up, nodded respectfully, and handed me the morning agenda without a word. She knew not to ask questions. At my company, silence wasn't fear. It was precision. It was control. The merger had been months in the making. A quiet acquisition, designed to look like a partnership for optics. On paper, it was clean. 2 boutique agencies merging creative vision, diversifying portfolios, expanding market reach. But in reality, it was a calculated move to absorb a struggling firm, his firm, and integrate its resources into our structure. The ink wasn't dry yet, but the power had already shifted. Blake Hartman didn't know that the woman with the tattoos and marked skin, the one he had deemed too unsightly for a party, was now sitting in the seat that controlled his professional fate. He passed me in the corridor twice that week. Both times, he looked through me. Not past me, through me, as if my presence was just peripheral noise in his day. I was used to that look. Men in tailored suits offering polite nods, avoiding eye contact when they couldn't place my title, or didn't want to. He probably thought I was someone from creative, maybe admin. Definitely not strategy. Definitely not executive. And certainly not the woman who had just been given final approval authority on his promotion proposal. I sat in on his pitch that Thursday. He didn't know I was there at first. The meeting was large, the boardroom full. I took my usual seat at the far end, where the light from the windows cast patterns across the long table. Blake entered with the confidence of someone who had never had to fight for room to speak. His suit was impeccable, his tone assertive. He talked about brand elevation, digital synergy, and future-proofing narratives. Words that sounded big and meant very little. The board smiled and nodded. I listened. He didn't recognize me, not even a flicker. Not the same eyes from the photos with Jenna. Not the same mouth that had formed the words visually complex. I wanted to laugh, but I didn't. I watched instead. Studied the way he moved, the way he controlled the tempo of the room with practiced charm. He was good at what he did, but not good enough to notice the woman who would decide if he ever did it again. Later that day, I received a soft inquiry from HR. Blake's direct report had submitted a proposal recommending him for senior partner, status post-merger. The promotion would include stock options, expanded control over client portfolios, and a rebranding of his team under the new joint agency name. The document had landed in my inbox with a blinking red flag. Final approval. Required, mine. I let it sit there for hours, untouched, not because I didn't know what to do, but because I needed to feel every second of that power. I needed to remember what it was like to be invisible in rooms I built, to be underestimated in campaigns I led, to be excluded from events that used my ideas as centerpieces. I had worked too hard, for too long, to pretend that any of this wasn't personal. That night, I stayed late. Most of the lights in the building had dimmed, the city outside glowing through the windows like a stage set. I reviewed the document again, line by line, then set it aside. I opened the photo Jenna had posted just days earlier, the one from her engagement shoot. Blake was smiling beside her, hand around her waist, their eyes locked in some romantic symmetry. It looked perfect, curated, safe. I wondered if she knew how much of her life he filtered through that same lens. If she had ever seen him look through people the way he looked through me. If she knew he built his comfort on the erasure of others. He wasn't a bad man. Not by the world's standards. He donated, mentored, spoke well in meetings. But his version of kindness was conditional. He extended it to those who made his life easier, who looked the part, who could blend into the background without disturbing the image he projected. And I had never been good at blending in. I was ink and edges and unpolished truths. The next morning, I forwarded the proposal back to HR with a brief note. Request deferred until after integration. Reassess pending direct performance review. It wasn't a no, but it was a pause, a mirror, a moment to force him to look, not just at his numbers, but at the people behind them. At the next weekly check-in, he entered the conference room, late. He nodded to the men in suits, smiled at the women in neutral-toned blazers, and then his eyes landed on me. Something flickered. Not recognition, Not yet. But discomfort. That tiny shift when someone starts to sense they've missed something important. I didn't hold his gaze. I didn't need to. Because for the first time he saw me, and it shook him. The signing was scheduled for a Tuesday. It was quiet in the office that morning, the kind of stillness that clings to the air before something irreversible happens. I arrived early, before the assistants started distributing their color-coded schedules, before the smell of burnt coffee floated from the break room, before Blake would arrive with his carefully curated charm and his passive indifference. I wore black. No reason, no symbolism, just instinct. My skin was bare. No sleeves to hide the ink, no powder to blur the marks on my neck. I looked like myself, unfiltered. That felt important. The room reserved for the signing wasn't large. It wasn't meant to be ceremonial. Just a long table, a tray of chilled water bottles, and a legal team who preferred efficient silence over small talk. The attorneys were already there, flipping through pages with red pens in hand, highlighting nothing, making sure every line had already been reviewed twice. These were the moments I used to dream about when I was starting out. Moments where your name appears above a title on the top page. When you're no longer someone who supports, but someone who decides. The final stack of documents sat in front of me, printed on thick ivory paper with bold lettering. I flipped through the pages one last time, not because I doubted anything, but because I wanted to remember the texture of the moment. Every clause had been negotiated, every number balanced, every timeline secured. By the time the pen touched the signature line, my hand didn't shake. My name flowed in confident black ink, the way it had 1,000 times before on smaller deals, on rebrands, on licensing contracts. But this one was different. This signature made me majority owner of the company Blake thought he controlled 60%. The number wasn't arbitrary. It wasn't about ego. It was about leverage, control with margin, power with room to maneuver. Enough to lead, but not suffocate. Enough to own, but still observe. When the ink dried, the lawyer across from me closed, the folder with a soft thud, like the sound of a chapter ending. One of the partners extended a hand, murmuring something about next steps, integration timelines, press releases. I nodded, took the folder, and left the room. I didn't need congratulations. What I needed was time, quiet time to let the weight of what I'd done settle into my bones. I returned to my office and locked the door behind me. For a few minutes, I just stood by the window, looking out over the street below. The people moved like clockwork, heads down, phones in hand, schedules packed. No one knew what had just happened 3 floors up. No one knew that the man preparing to send out an internal memo about his vision for the future now reported to the woman he hadn't bothered to look in the eye. Later that afternoon, the news started circulating internally. Strategic merger finalized. Alignment of creative leadership. All the vague, polished language executives use to announce power shifts without rattling too many egos. My name wasn't in the first email. That was intentional. I wanted the recognition to come second. First, I wanted the silence, the moment of confusion, the scramble to understand. I was in the hallway when Blake found out. I saw it happen in real time. He was walking with a group from his department, casually debriefing something. Someone showed him the announcement on their phone. I saw his posture shift before his expression did, shoulders tightening, mouth pausing mid-sentence. He scanned the message again, then looked up, eyes scanning the corridor like he'd missed something. Then he saw me. This time, he didn't look past me. He stopped walking. The others kept moving, some whispering, some glancing back. He stood there, frozen in that half-second where arrogance meets recognition. The quiet flicker behind the eyes, when someone realizes the narrative they've been living is about to be rewritten. I didn't smile. I didn't speak. I didn't have to. He approached my office an hour later. I heard the knock but didn't respond immediately. I let him wait. When I finally opened the door, he tried to speak, but the words didn't come out. I gestured for him to sit. He didn't. He stood there, eyes darting to the framed certifications on my wall, the campaign posters that bore my design, the team photos from launches he'd never been invited to. He asked a question I'd anticipated. How long? I'd known. I answered with a date, 6 months before Jenna's engagement. I told him I'd been part of the initial evaluation team, that his agency had been on a short list since their quarterly dip. He asked why no one told him. I said it wasn't his role to be informed at that stage. The truth hovered in the air between us, unsaid but screaming, because you never saw me. Because I wasn't important enough to be real to you. He tried to pivot, to talk about future plans, synergy, strategy. I let him talk. I wanted to hear how he spun stories when the ground was shifting beneath him. He said all the right things. But his voice was thinner now, slightly unsure. For the first time, he was managing a conversation he hadn't initiated. When he left, I closed the door and leaned against it, breathing in the weight of the moment. Not because I needed validation, but because I needed the silence to settle around me again. The silence I had lived in for years. The silence of being tolerated, managed, ignored. It was gone now. My name was on the door. My signature was in the contract, and the house he thought he was building, it stood on my ground. The wedding was set to take place on a Saturday evening, just outside the city, in one of those picturesque venues that looked like it had been designed by an algorithm trained on bridal Pinterest boards. Whitewashed brick, manicured hedges, soft amber lighting stringed overhead like stars you could reach for. Every detail carefully styled to appear effortless. The guest list was curated, the palette muted, the dress code strictly enforced. Elegance without excess, tradition without texture. A perfect stage for a life that looked polished from the outside. And this time, I wasn't just an unwelcome guest. I was the one whose name was on the donor plaque nailed to the entrance. Archway. I hadn't planned to go at first. For weeks, I told myself I had no interest in being part of a spectacle that had deliberately excluded me from its earliest moments. I had been erased, written out before the first toast was drafted, and I thought there was power in staying away. But something shifted after the signing, after the brief conversation in my office, after watching Blake fumble through his performance of professionalism. I realized it wasn't about being seen, it was about being impossible to ignore. The sponsorship came through my company, cloaked in corporate distance. An anonymous contribution at first, one that funded the lighting, the custom calligraphy, the floral arrangements flown in from a vendor we acquired last year. The planner didn't question the payment. They were used to quiet donors, people who wanted the glamour without the credit. But 3 days before the wedding, I had my team update the official printed program to reflect the reality. With special thanks to Marissa T. Clark, Executive Creative Partner. Small font, bottom of the page, subtle but indelible. I arrived 15 minutes before the ceremony began. No grand entrance, no announcement. Just a car pulled up to the circular drive and a woman stepping out in a black silk dress that didn't ask for permission. My skin was uncovered. Shoulders, arms, collarbone, every inch of ink and mark visible in the soft dusk light. I walked through the gates and saw it happen almost instantly. Heads turned. Whispers flared. A silence moved like static through the crowd. Most of the guests didn't know me, but enough of them did, enough for the air to shift. Blake was standing near the bar, glass in hand, mid-conversation. He saw me from across the courtyard, and I watched as the blood drained from his face. He didn't move at first, like his brain was buffering, trying to compute what my presence meant. I saw the flicker in his eyes. Not just recognition, but panic. Because this wasn't an ambush. It was exposure. I wasn't crashing the wedding. I had helped pay for it. My signature had lit the lanterns strung above his head. Jenna was nowhere in sight. Not yet. I didn't expect her to greet me. Didn't need her to. This wasn't about closure. It wasn't about reconciliation. It was about standing in the center of a story that had tried to cut me out, and letting the truth speak louder than the decor. People began to approach me. Tentative at first. A few familiar faces from our shared childhood. Some offered half-hearted compliments, nervous smiles, comments on how striking I looked, how bold my tattoos were. I nodded politely, accepted their unease like an old coat I had long since outgrown. They didn't know what to say. They were used to the edited version of me, the cropped-out cousin, the absent sibling, the roomer with a face. But now, there was no cropping. I was here, full frame. When Blake finally made his way over, his steps were hesitant, his jaw tight. He greeted me as if trying to perform normalcy for an invisible camera. His voice lacked its usual pitch, the performative ease gone, stripped down to something rawer. I let him speak, let him murmur phrases that danced around accountability. He asked why I was there. I told him I was invited. Which was true, in a sense. Money invites itself. He tried to pivot to business, to professionalism, to anything that might steer the moment away from what it was. A reckoning. He mentioned Jenna's stress levels, the pressure of the day, how things had gotten miscommunicated. I looked past him, toward the ceremony arch where chairs were lined in perfect symmetry. I didn't need his explanations. I had lived them, worn them, felt them scratch against my skin in rooms where I wasn't meant to speak. Eventually, he walked away, back into the crowd, back into the story he'd built for himself. But nothing about him felt steady anymore. His steps were uneven, his shoulders hunched in a way I hadn't seen before. Not defeat, exactly, but the weight of something shifting. I stood alone for most of the ceremony. I didn't try to insert myself. I watched, observed. The vows were beautiful, curated like everything else. Jenna looked luminous, and when she said her promises, her voice didn't shake. I wondered if she had practiced them in front of a mirror, the way we used to rehearse school presentations. I wondered if she meant them. No one asked me to leave. No one could. My name was etched into the infrastructure, into the budget, into the lighting plan, and the cocktail signage, and the silver-embossed menu cards. I wasn't there to ruin their moment. I was there to reclaim mine. By the time the cake was cut, the mood had softened. People were drunk enough to stop pretending they didn't know who I was. A few even thanked me for the flowers, the ambiance, the music. I accepted their gratitude with the same calm I'd worn all evening. Not because I needed it, but because I had learned that sometimes dignity is quiet. Sometimes it wears black and says nothing. I left before the dancing started. Slipped out through the gate as easily as I'd arrived. The air was cooler now. The stars above real this time, and for the first time in months, I didn't feel erased. I felt undeniable. The Monday after the wedding, the office felt heavier, not in any measurable way. No changes in lighting, no shifts in temperature. But something about the air was different, denser. There's a silence that lives in places where people are waiting for something to explode, a kind of tension that hums under conversations and stretches itself into every pause. I could feel it in the way people lowered their voices when I walked past, in the way eyes darted away just a second too late, as if they didn't want to be caught staring but couldn't stop themselves. Everyone had seen the name. They had read the program. They had put the pieces together. I arrived before 9 and went straight to my office, closing the door behind me with a soft but final sound. The desk was clean, intentionally so. Just the merger documents stacked in one corner, a leather notepad, and my laptop. Outside, I could hear the elevator ding and voices murmuring in the hall. I didn't look up when his name popped up on my screen. An internal message, short and simple. "Are you available to talk?" I stared at it for a moment. Not because I didn't know the answer, but because I wanted to feel what it was like to pause when someone asked for access to me. To remember how many times I'd asked the same, in so many words, and been denied. By his silence, by Jenna's absence, by my mother's cold coffee mornings. I minimized the window and opened my inbox instead. A message from legal was already waiting. Blake had formally submitted a request to revise his role in the integration phase. It was dressed up in soft language, realignment, clarity, mutual understanding. But I knew what it was. A survival tactic. He came to my office an hour later without waiting for a reply. The knock was tentative, followed by the slow creak of the door opening. I didn't rise. He stood in the doorway, not quite crossing the threshold. There was no tie this time, no confident swagger. Just a man whose foundation had been shifted while he was still trying to build. He said my name. Softly, like he wasn't sure if he had the right to say it anymore. I met his eyes, waited. He stepped inside, closed the door gently behind him, and sat in the chair opposite mine like he'd been called into the principal's office. Except this wasn't school, and I wasn't going to ask him what he'd learned. He started to talk. Apologies first, always the apologies, the kind that come too late and carry too little weight. Then the explanations, the stress, the miscommunications, the pressure to curate. He said Jenna had never meant to exclude me, that it wasn't about how I looked, that things had spiraled and he didn't know how to stop them without making everything worse. He said he regretted how he handled things, that if he could do it again, he'd do it differently. I listened. Not because I needed the words, but because I wanted to watch him squirm beneath them. To hear the way his voice cracked when it tried to bend toward sincerity. He wasn't a cruel man, just a cowardly one. And cowardice doesn't require malice. It only needs silence. He had been silent when it mattered. And now he was trying to fill the void with manufactured contrition. He asked if there was a way to reset, to clarify boundaries, to rebuild trust. I picked up a pen, clicked it once, then set it down again. I told him to route all further communication through my attorney, that I was no longer accepting verbal explanations, that moving forward, we would work in writing. He blinked at that. Not offended, not angry, just surprised. Like he had believed this conversation was a chance to redeem himself, as if dignity were something he could negotiate for now, on the other side of betrayal. He left without another word. The door closed behind him with a soft whisper, and the silence returned, lighter now. Not so much tension as release. Later that week, I received a draft proposal from his team. A restructured role, fewer responsibilities, a gradual transition. It was clean, respectful, appropriately deferential. I forwarded it to legal without comment. I saw him in the elevator a few days later. We didn't speak. He stood one step behind me, eyes on the floor, hands clenched in his pockets. When we reached my floor, I stepped out first. I didn't look back. That evening, I opened a bottle of wine and sat on my balcony, the city unfolding, in quiet lights beneath me. I thought about how many times I had apologized for taking up space, for having skin that made people stare, for wearing clothes that didn't cover the marks, for being too visible in rooms built to favor neutrality. I had spent years trying to blend into backdrops, to soften my voice, to choose the angle that offended the least. But up here, looking down, everything felt different. The view was wide, unfiltered, real. The people looked small. The noise didn't reach. and I understood something simple and sharp. Power doesn't change who you are. It just removes the requirement to apologize for it. He had looked down on me once in his own way, casually, confidently, without thought. But he'd never seen me from above. Not like this. And from where I stood now, his world looked breakable. I didn't need to explain myself anymore. I just needed to keep building. The first time I saw a magazine cover that looked even remotely like me, I was 27 and walking past a newsstand in Manhattan. The model had one small birthmark near her chin, photoshopped just enough to appear deliberate, almost fashionable. The headline read, "Redefining Beauty," and I remember thinking how easy it is to redefine something when you've never had to survive under its weight. I didn't buy the magazine. I didn't need another version of beauty sold back to me in watered-down pieces. My body had never been a campaign. It had been a battleground, a burden, and, slowly, painfully, a blueprint for freedom. It took years to strip away the shame. Not just from strangers, but from people I loved. The words they used were always carefully chosen. Suggestions, hints, concerned advice. They rarely said ugly. They said unflattering, not professional, distracting. They said brave when they meant exposed. They said unique when they meant tolerable. My mother's silence, my sister's edits, the way Blake said clean and meant invisible. I absorbed it all until my own reflection became unfamiliar, like something borrowed. It wasn't anger that changed me. It was exhaustion. I was tired of apologizing for being visible. Now, when I walk into a room, I don't shrink. I let the ink on my arms speak first. Let the constellation of marks across my shoulders whisper a history no one else has the right to rewrite. I wear sleeveless dresses without second-guessing. I speak in meetings without checking who else is in the room. I've stopped anticipating shame before it arrives. If it comes, I let it pass. It no longer owns a chair at my table. There are moments when I catch my own reflection and don't recognize the woman staring back. Not because she's unfamiliar, but because for so long I didn't expect her to survive. She isn't softer. She isn't safer. She's not trying to be any less than she is. And that, more than anything, is what makes her powerful. People used to stare at me and see discomfort. Now they stare and see control. A few months after the wedding, a magazine reached out. An industry publication, known for their profiles on creative leaders. They wanted to feature me. Not just my work. Me. They asked if I'd be open to a shoot. I hesitated at first. Years of conditioning don't vanish overnight. But I agreed, and I set the terms. No retouching, no soft filters, no concealer over what's already written in me. I told the photographer to light me like marble, sharp, unyielding, deliberate. When the photos came back, I didn't flinch. I saw every curve, every shadow, every line that had once been a target, and now stood like a signature. The article went live in the fall. The headline read, "She rebranded the industry. Now she's rewriting the rules." The response was louder than I expected. Emails from strangers. Messages from women who had hidden their bodies for years. Young designers just starting out, asking how to keep their voices intact. Some were sweet. Some were raw. One woman wrote, "I didn't know I was allowed to look like myself and still be successful." I printed that one. It hangs above my desk. I see Jenna sometimes. Not often. She sends holiday cards now. Polite, curated, distant. Her handwriting hasn't changed. She still dots her I's with tiny circles. There's a part of me that wonders if she regrets what happened. If she watches interviews with me and feels a pang of something she can't quite name. But I don't chase those thoughts. We've both chosen our stories, and mine no longer fits into hers. My mother hasn't changed much. She still folds her napkins a certain way, still watches cable news with the volume too loud. But once, when I visited for exactly 47 minutes on a Sunday afternoon, she reached out and touched my arm where the snake curls around my skin. She didn't say anything, just left her hand there for a second longer than necessary. And that was enough. The office has changed too. More women in power now. More sleeves rolled up, necklines lowered, truths uncovered. I've watched quiet. Voices rise and unsteady hands become decisive. And every time it happens, I feel something settle in me, a peace I never thought I'd earn. I don't know what comes next. I don't have a 5-year plan. But I know what won't change. I won't dim myself to make others comfortable. I won't ask for permission to belong in spaces I've built. I won't edit my face or my arms or the skin that tells my story louder than words ever could. Beauty isn't something I chase anymore. It's something I define, moment by moment, choice by choice. And now, when they look at me, they see it. Not because I became easier to look at, but because I stopped looking away.